For decades, one of country music's most private love stories hid in plain sight. At 66, Marty Stuart is finally breaking his silence. Not just about his career, but about the woman who shaped his life behind the scenes, Connie Smith. What he reveals now, about a promise he made as a child, a secret they kept during the hardest years, and something hidden from even their closest friends, will change how you see both legends forever. Marty Stuart's story begins not with fame, but with obsession. A childhood obsession with country music, and one woman in particular, Connie Smith. He was just 12 years old when he first laid eyes on her at a local fair. She wasn't just a star to him, she was something divine. Decades before their marriage, Marty told his mother that one day he would marry Connie Smith. Everyone laughed it off, but for Marty, it was no joke. It was destiny. What's eerie now is how serious he was, and how nobody, not even Connie herself, saw it coming. Behind the rhinestones and fame was a young boy with a vow burning quietly in his heart. The question is, how did he go from star-struck kid to her husband? And what did Connie say when she found out he'd planned it all along? From the moment young Marty Stuart met Connie Smith backstage at a fairground concert in Mississippi, something in his world shifted. He was just a 12-year-old prodigy, already playing mandolin with Lester Flatt. But nothing prepared him for the overwhelming awe he felt meeting Connie. She wasn't just a star in his eyes. She was the embodiment of everything country music meant to him. Beauty, mystery, pain, and power wrapped in a single voice. Marty later admitted that he turned to his mama and said, "I'm gonna marry her someday." Everyone laughed, including Connie. At the time, she was in her 30s with a full career, a complex personal life, and no clue that this wide-eyed kid would eventually become her husband. Years passed. Marty's star rose fast. He played with Johnny Cash, toured across the world, and became a staple of the genre himself. But through all the fame, one truth lingered. He never let go of that promise. He watched Connie from afar, quietly, respectfully, even as she stepped away from the spotlight and battled private demons. She had experienced heartbreak, personal loss, and the suffocating pressure of being a woman in a man's world. Her voice carried weight because it had been weathered by real pain. Marty saw that, understood it, and in his own silent way, carried her legacy even when she wasn't performing. Then, decades later, life made the impossible possible. Marty and Connie reconnected at a tribute concert. She was older, wiser, more guarded, but she noticed something different in Marty. He wasn't the kid she remembered. He was a man now, deeply rooted in tradition, with the same fire in his heart. He still spoke of her the same way, with reverence, and he never forgot what he said as a boy. Slowly, with patience and respect, Marty made his intentions known, not just with words, but through a lifetime of quiet admiration. When they finally married in 1997, it wasn't just a union. It was the closing of a long, strange loop in country music history. But behind their love story was something even deeper, something that Connie had kept to herself for years. In private interviews and subtle remarks, she hinted at a mystery about their bond that the public never knew, something that still haunts them to this day. Marty Stuart's marriage to Connie Smith wasn't just a romantic triumph. It was a spiritual reckoning. To many, their age gap raised eyebrows. She was 17 years his senior, and by the time they tied the knot in 1997, she had already lived through a lifetime of personal storms, while Marty was still deep in his creative prime. But to them, age was never the story. The real story was what they found in each other, a kind of refuge no one else could understand. And yet, behind the poetic love story was a darker truth. Marty had seen what fame did to legends. He watched Johnny Cash and June Carter's public adoration strain under the weight of substance abuse, pressure, and public expectation. He knew firsthand that even the strongest love could crack under spotlight heat. And with Connie, he was determined to protect her from all that, even if it meant hiding her from the world. Connie had secrets, not scandalous ones, but deeply personal scars that Marty never tried to erase, only honor. She had walked away from her career in the 1970s to raise 5 children and escape the pressures of the industry. But walking away left a void. Though she performed sporadically, Connie retreated into a quiet existence, privately wrestling with her purpose. Marty could see it. The way she still lit up when she sang, and the way she dimmed when the curtain fell. That fire hadn't gone out, it had just been buried. And Marty knew her voice. That heartbreaking soprano deserved more than a footnote in country music history. So he did what few husbands ever do. He turned his own stage into hers. Throughout the late 1990s and 2000s, Marty quietly but deliberately brought Connie back into the limelight. On his shows, his tours, and in every interview where he had a chance to name-drop the woman who'd changed his life. He wasn't just building her up, he was reintroducing the world to a woman it had nearly forgotten. But here's where things get strange. Despite the love, the shared stage, and mutual admiration, there was something both of them never spoke about in public. A personal loss they endured together, quietly. Family members have hinted at it, close friends have alluded to it, but neither Connie nor Marty ever confirmed it. A pregnancy that ended in heartbreak, a shared dream that never made it into their fairy tale. That loss became a ghost in their story, a silent note in every harmony they sang. Marty once said in a rare moment, "Some songs you never finish writing. You just hum the melody for the rest of your life." Whether he was talking about Connie, the life they shared, or the pain they buried, no one knows for sure. But whatever it was, it haunted him enough to build a private chapel on their property. A place where, to this day, they go to sit in silence, just the two of them, and whatever they're still carrying. Despite Marty Stuart and Connie Smith's deep love and public smiles, their private life carried a silence that few could understand. On stage, they were country royalty, gliding through harmonies with a kind of ease that made it look effortless. But offstage, their world was structured around routines, retreats, and quiet escapes from the fame that had once nearly broken them both. Marty built his world around preserving history, collecting vintage country memorabilia, restoring forgotten musical artifacts, and even creating a museum of country music inside his home. But behind that obsession with the past was a deeper motive: control. Control over what was remembered, what was forgotten, and what was never to be spoken about again. One of the most puzzling parts of their story is how often they both referenced God and redemption, yet shied away from discussing specific moments of pain. Friends close to the couple say Marty once tore down an entire recording session in 2002 after Connie walked into the studio and heard a song that sounded a little too much like Goodbye. They never spoke about that session again, but something shifted after that day. Connie stopped appearing at certain shows. Marty started traveling solo more often. Rumors swirled. Had they separated? Were they covering up deeper emotional fractures? But then they'd reappear, hand in hand at a gospel show, smiling, like nothing ever happened, as if heartbreak itself was something they knew how to camouflage. Behind the gates of their quiet Tennessee home, the couple lived almost like recluses during certain seasons. Neighbors mentioned they'd go months without seeing either of them. No cars, no music, no guests. Then, out of nowhere, Marty's tour bus would be seen pulling out at dawn, or Connie would be spotted walking the grounds alone, Bible in hand. The whispers became louder when fans noticed that Marty stopped talking about the future in interviews. Instead, he'd only speak about legacy, history, preservation, almost as if he'd resigned himself to the idea that his best chapters had already been written. But perhaps the most mysterious piece of their puzzle was the journal, an old leather-bound notebook Marty kept in a locked drawer in his music room. Those who've seen it say it's filled with poems, confessions, drawings, even letters never sent. Many are addressed to her, though it's never made clear whether he meant Connie or someone else entirely. One line scribbled in the margin read, "If she goes before me, I won't sing again." Another page simply said, "I still talk to the baby when I'm alone." Whether it was grief, faith, or guilt driving those words, no one could say. The public may see a legendary couple wrapped in rhinestones and legacy, but those closest to them know Marty and Connie have been carrying something deeper. A quiet sorrow they turned into melody, a mystery they buried between the lyrics, and a love that, despite all its beauty, still aches in the silence. Behind every legend lies a chapter too painful to sing about, and for Marty Stuart, that chapter may have begun long before he ever met Connie Smith. Part 5 of this emotional journey dives into the years when Marty was still finding his voice, not as a performer, but as a man shaped by longing, spiritual conflict, and a hidden past that he rarely allowed to surface in interviews. Long before their marriage, Marty had openly idolized Connie, but what many forget is that this adoration began when he was just a teenager, opening for her during the early years of his career. To the world, it seemed like a fairy tale, an earnest young prodigy falling in love with his musical hero. But when the two finally married in 1997, decades after their first meeting, some in the industry raised quiet concerns. Was this marriage built on mutual healing or emotional dependency? The age difference was noted but never questioned aloud. Not in country music circles where tradition often trumps transparency. Marty, who was 17 years Connie's junior, always painted their relationship as one of divine timing, saying God brought us together when we both were finally ready. But some longtime friends whispered a different version of events. They say Marty had waited his whole life for her, and once he finally got her, he didn't know how to protect her from the shadows still haunting them both. Connie had stepped away from the spotlight for years after her earlier stardom had left her spiritually and emotionally drained. She found solace in faith, in motherhood, and in silence. By the time she and Marty reconnected, she had already buried multiple versions of herself, her younger self, her struggling self, even her once vibrant ambition. And Marty, whose identity had become tangled in music preservation and nostalgia, may have seen in Connie not just a partner, but a final anchor to something pure, something worth saving. But behind their smiles, behind the duets and gospel harmonies, lay a heaviness that never quite lifted. Marty once confessed in a rare backstage interview that some songs make Connie cry before we even sing the first note. When pressed, he wouldn't reveal which songs, only saying they remind her of what she left behind. One particularly haunting performance in 2014 had fans asking questions. During a quiet acoustic set at a small Opry show, Connie visibly broke down mid-verse, her voice cracking as she sang a line about losing faith in the middle of a hymn. Marty gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and the two finished the song in silence. No encore, no explanation. In the years that followed, the couple retreated even further from the public eye, and though they never announced any separation or hardship, their once regular public appearances dwindled to almost nothing. Marty's statements turned increasingly cryptic, speaking about the cost of devotion and songs you sing only in empty rooms. Part 5 isn't just about what happened. It's about what was felt, what was feared, and what may have been left unsaid between two icons of country music who lived their love not just in the spotlight, but in the shadows between curtain calls. Part 6 peels back the velvet curtain on a truth even Marty Stuart himself hesitated to voice, that loving Connie Smith meant also loving the ghosts that came with her. For decades, Connie had been the picture of quiet strength, a beauty with a voice like church bells, rising through the 1960s as one of country music's first true female stars. But what many never knew was the private heartbreaks she carried in silence, including a history of mental health struggles, deep loneliness during her peak fame, and a painful personal loss that nearly shattered her completely. Marty had idolized Connie since he was 12 years old, watching her on stage, dreaming not just of singing alongside her, but of understanding the sadness in her eyes that no spotlight could brighten. When they married in 1997, he thought he was walking into a love story written in the stars. But what he found was something far more complicated. A woman who had been broken by fame, abandoned by the industry at times, and nearly forgotten by the very people who once worshipped her. Marty didn't just marry a country legend, he married her pain. Close friends described long stretches of silence between the couple, not out of anger, but out of reflection. Connie would go days without wanting to speak, lost in memories triggered by an old tune or the sound of a steel guitar on the radio. Marty, instead of pushing her, would simply sit with her in the quiet. He once told a friend, "She doesn't need saving. She needs someone to understand why she stopped asking to be saved." There was one moment, though, that Marty finally shared in a 2022 interview that left fans speechless. He recalled coming home late after a tour, walking into their living room, and finding Connie sitting in the dark, holding a faded photograph of her younger self on the Opry stage. She looked at me and said, "Sometimes I don't recognize that girl. Sometimes I miss her, and sometimes I don't know who she was at all." It was the first time Marty realized that his wife hadn't just left behind a career, she'd left behind a version of herself that maybe never truly belonged to her. Marty said that moment changed everything. He stopped trying to reignite Connie's passion for the stage and started protecting the peace she fought so hard to find. He turned down multiple duet tour offers. He stopped encouraging her to record again, and instead, he built their world around stillness, nature, prayer, and small family dinners, not screaming crowds. This chapter of their story isn't glamorous. It's not covered in rhinestones or echoed in applause, but it is, perhaps, the most honest. Part 6 shows us that even legends can feel lost. Even icons can carry scars. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do for the person you love is to simply let them be. Broken, healing, and whole all at once. Part 7 explores the quiet transformation Marty Stuart underwent while living in the shadow of Connie Smith's legendary but haunted past, and how that evolution ultimately reshaped his purpose, his music, and the way he saw fame itself. For years, Marty had been the eternal student of country music, a man with flashy jackets, a deep appreciation for tradition, and a fierce desire to preserve what made country great. But being with Connie forced him to look deeper, not just at the genre, but at the people inside it, who had been left behind, bruised, or erased. He began to see the cost of the spotlight more clearly. Connie wasn't just his wife. She was a symbol of what happened when the industry demanded too much from someone with a tender heart. And that realization hit Marty hard. He once said, "Country music doesn't always honor its own. Sometimes it chews them up and buries them in forgotten verses." That quote wasn't just about Connie. It was about all the forgotten legends he quietly vowed to protect. Marty started making moves that puzzled his peers. He turned down mainstream record deals in favor of releasing music on his own label. He focused on preservation, building the Congress of Country Music in Mississippi, a museum dedicated not just to instruments and outfits, but to the souls of the genre. He dug up forgotten recordings. He brought dying legends back on stage for one last standing ovation, and he did it all with a kind of reverence that seemed to whisper, "I couldn't save Connie from the pain, but maybe I can stop others from being erased." At home, he created a kind of sanctuary. Connie no longer had to worry about being anyone but herself. They'd sit on the porch in the evenings, listening to old gospel songs. She'd hum along softly, and sometimes Marty would record her on an old tape machine, not for release, not for the world, but for memory, for love, for the music that had once been her lifeline and now had become her lullaby. Friends say Marty changed the way he performed too. The man who once strutted proudly in custom boots now seemed more grounded, more reflective. He began ending shows with heartfelt tributes to artists who had passed. He'd tell stories not about himself, but about others, his heroes, his mentors, the ones who'd been overlooked. And he always came back to Connie. She was his greatest muse, his most painful reminder, and the quiet fire that kept him from becoming just another showman. In many ways, Part 7 reveals how Marty Stuart evolved from a performer into a protector, not just of Connie, but of the legacy of country music itself. His marriage wasn't just a love story. It was a turning point, a gentle but unshakable lesson that to truly honor the past, you have to listen to its wounds, hold space for its silence, and carry forward not just the songs, but the stories behind them. Part 8 delves into the private life Marty Stuart and Connie Smith created away from the spotlight, a world that was both deeply romantic and quietly sacred, shaped by decades of heartbreak, redemption, and quiet victories no one else saw. While fans only ever caught glimpses of their relationship in public, at award shows, Opry appearances, or behind a microphone, what unfolded behind closed doors was a love story wrapped in healing and laced with the pain of everything they'd survived. Connie, once the golden girl of Nashville, had long since traded ambition for peace. And Marty, he was more than content to follow her into that stillness. They built a home filled with music, laughter, prayer, and a rare kind of understanding. There were no handlers, no deadlines, no producers demanding one more take. Just vinyl spinning on a record player, handwritten lyrics taped to the refrigerator, and long mornings spent in the kitchen talking about everything and nothing. One of Marty's closest friends recalled walking into their home and seeing a small gospel chapel built in the back. It wasn't just for decoration. They used it. Connie would sing softly, barely above a whisper, while Marty strummed beside her. It wasn't performance, it was confession, prayer, and protection, all rolled into one. In that tiny chapel, they weren't stars. They were just two souls holding on. But the real mystery, the thing fans never saw, was how much of Marty's later career was built around Connie without ever putting her in the spotlight. He refused to speak on her behalf, rarely shared intimate details, and always shielded her from the harsh lights of industry gossip. When journalists asked, he'd simply smile and say, "She's the reason I'm still here." And he meant it. Connie had suffered deeply during her early years in Nashville: personal trauma, industry manipulation, and the pressure of being a young woman with a voice too big to hide. Marty saw all of it, understood the silence behind her smile, and made it his mission to never let her be treated that way again. Not by anyone. Their home became a safe haven not just for themselves, but for others, lost musicians, forgotten legends, young artists in need of guidance. People came through, sat at their table, cried on their couch, and left a little lighter. Marty and Connie didn't post about it. They didn't make it a brand. They just lived it. In this chapter, we realize their marriage wasn't a spectacle. It was a rescue. Two people who had seen the worst of the music business, who carried wounds too deep for interviews, found in each other a rare and lasting peace. And while fans worshipped the myth of Marty Stuart, the real miracle was what he built quietly with Connie, a sanctuary made of hymns, honesty, and a kind of love that healed in silence. Part 9 brings us to the present, where Marty Stuart, now 66, sits in quiet reflection of everything he's lived through, every note he's played, and every scar the industry left behind. But when he finally opens up about Connie Smith, the real Connie, not the legend, it's not with fanfare or gossip, it's with reverence, because behind every rhinestone suit, every blazing guitar solo, and every stage light that ever shined on him, there was her shadow, her strength, her silence, her story. Marty admits now that he'd been chasing something his whole life: the sound, the spirit, the soul of country music. But he didn't realize until later that what he was really chasing was Connie herself, not just as a woman, but as a symbol of everything pure, everything sacred about the genre he gave his life to. She embodied the gospel roots, the unfiltered truth, the pain wrapped in beauty that drew him to music in the first place. In one of the rare interviews he gave this year, he was asked, "What's your proudest achievement?" And he didn't mention his Grammy wins, or his induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame, or even the preservation work he's done to protect the genre's history. He just smiled and said that she lets me love her. That was it. And if you know their story, you understand why that answer says everything. What few people know is that Marty nearly lost her once. There was a moment early in their relationship, before they married, when old wounds from Connie's past nearly pulled her away for good. The trauma she carried made trust hard. Fame had taken too much from her, but Marty waited. No pressure, no promises, just presence. And slowly, she came back, not just to him, but to herself. They built their life brick by brick, not for cameras or crowds, but for peace. Their mornings were filled with prayer, their nights with old records and shared memories. They laughed more than people think. They cried, too, but mostly they were still. And in that stillness, they found what Nashville had nearly stolen from them, a love that asked nothing and gave everything. Marty Stuart opening up now isn't for attention. It's not a promo for an album. It's a eulogy for the years that nearly broke them, a testimony to the power of healing, and a quiet reminder that sometimes the real story isn't written in Billboard charts or Opry performances. It's written in the way two people hold each other through storms no one else sees. And maybe that's what makes this final chapter so powerful. Because behind all the glitz, all the country music history he's fought to preserve, Marty Stuart's greatest legacy may not be a song or a stage, but the love story that lived quietly between the verses.